Welcome back to another episode of the React Native Radio Podcast. Brought to you by excessive amounts of caffeine and never-ending sarcasm. Episode 287, interview with Charlie Cheever, co-founder of Expo.
Hey, Charlie. Thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I hear you're somewhere tropical right now. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm in Hawaii for a few days. We have team members all over the world and visiting some here.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
That sounds like a really fun place to work for
I feel like
days.
I need to hire some people over in Hawaii so I can go visit them. That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, it was a strategic maneuver.
That's a good long-term business strategy.
Exactly. Well, actually, my wife is over there right now on vacation.
Without you.
Just by herself. Yes.
A mom vacation. Yeah. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have 4 kids. Well, 3 at home. And so she needs a break once in a while. So she's over there just enjoying the sun while I'm taking care of the kids and shoveling snow.
I hope to be able to do that someday.
Yeah, you should make that happen. That'd be a lot of fun.
It's on the bucket list for sure.
Well, I'm Jamin, CTO of Infinite Red, and I'm here with my co-host Robin, who is the director of engineering, also at Infinite Red. And we're joined today by Charlie Cheever, who is the co-founder of Expo. And before we get into the interview, which I'm really excited about, let's hear from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored, as always, by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US and Canada. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up at infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. I want to start things off, Charlie, by just kind of getting a sense for your background. Where did you grow up? Like where did you, where are you from?
Yeah, I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's a great city. I think it's the best city and a great place to grow up. But one thing, I feel like a lot of people my age who got into sort of computers or programming, stuff like that, their parents were engineers or professors of electrical engineering or something like that. But my parents, my dad was just a lawyer and my mom was just worked at nonprofits. And the way that I ended up learning programming was that my dad had taken me to the library one day. And I just saw this book waiting to be reshelved that was just how to make your own computer or how to create your own computer games. And I just said, I think computer games are awesome. Like, I would love to make my own computer games. And so I took this book out of the library and then this first page of it says to use this book, you have to know how to program in the basic programming language. So if you don't know how to do that, go get this other book and learn how to program in basic. And so I went on this big tangent to learn how to program.
That sounds exactly like me trying to read the documentation for anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, it's like, in order to do this, you need to know about this. And then I'm like three pages deep.
I think people try to use this trick a lot in like modern educational stuff where they try to sort of use making video games as sort of a trick to get people to learn programming. But
how did you get into programming, Jamin?
Well, I wanted to make games and, I wanted games is what I wanted. I didn't want to make games. I wanted games, but I wasn't close enough to a computer store. So I think Charlie and I were pretty similar in age. I think both born the same year or something like that. And I mean, I remember those years. How old were you, Charlie, during that time?
I was in 3rd grade then, so it's probably 9.
Okay.
Something
Yeah. A little earlier than me. I think I was like 11, 12, somewhere in there. Yeah. Yeah. And what kind of computer did you have access to? And
I would wake up early and walk to school and use the Apple IIes in the computer lab at school and type in. You could. And one thing that was great about an Apple II computer, you could just turn on the computer. If you didn't have a disk in it, you just hit Control-C and it just had this prompt, and you could just start typing in code or other commands into thing and just start doing it. And so like you could just get these books with code examples, and there's some magazines and stuff that had it, and you could just type stuff in. And it was really, really accessible to get to the coding part of stuff. But I think the way that I got better at it was when we got to middle school, and my mom bought me like a graphing calculator, and a lot of school recommended. So I learned. I got to the point where I could type very, very fast on a TI-85.
Oh man.
Yep.
There were a couple things about graphing calculators where like you had them all the time. So like.
Oh yeah, and you were allowed to have them during tests. The number of kids I knew that just like put all the answers like programmed into their TI-85.
Yes.
Yeah. There's a lot of things you could do if you were creative. Just being able, like having an hour-long bus ride. You don't have access to a computer there, but you have your calculator the whole time. Or, you're in social studies class and you're not paying that close attention, but you're able to make games that way. And then also they had these like link cables on not all of the TI models had them, but a lot of people in my class started to get the same model, because then we would connect our cables to each other. It was basically
a Game Boy.
Send each other
like,
games. Yeah.
Game Boy before
Basically.
Game Boy.
Yeah. But also sort of, as you were saysaying, you're allowed to have like, it's a calculator. It's not a game. It's not a Game Boy.
Right. It's like, I'm doing schoolwork because it's like, it's a calculator.
Right.
Yeah. It's sort of an early lesson in the importance of distribution.
And I mean, you were like all that, like that fun stuff that you were doing was like ultimately learning. It was just disguised.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think my parents are actually very supportive, which I think they might not have been. We happen to live right by the Carnegie Mellon campus. And so my mom found a summer program where one of the professors there just decided to teach like intro to computer science, basically to high school kids. And so I ended up doing that program and learning a lot about like theoretical computer science and stuff like that. And went from just wanting to make games to being interested in computer science and theory and whatnot.
Well, that's amazing. I love that. Did you ever do QBasic? That's what I want to know.
Yeah. I actually, a really funny story is we eventually got like we had a Mac for most of my time growing up, but then I convinced my parents to get me like a Windows computer. I mean, because things were different back then, and Windows computers were kind of better in a lot of ways than Macs.
Yeah.
They're faster. More stuff worked on them, especially more games and more programming stuff. And so I remember there was one day where I just sat down. I decided I would make like a Tetris clone in one sitting, and I just did it. I think I sat down for like 12 hours and made this complete Tetris clone. I didn't really know what I think I was maybe in 8th grade then, and I didn't really know how to organize code or like, use functions, like everything. There's just like a whole bunch of global variables that were confusingly named, but like it was all organized in my head. And I actually made this pretty good Tetris clone that was fun to play. But then, like your computer gets old and it dies and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But years later, I was working on Quora, like this question and answer website. Probably like, a year into working on that, we had a medium-sized community of people who were answering questions. And I posted this question that's like, does anyone know where to find, a copy of Quadrax, the 1996 QBasic Tetris clone written by Charlie Cheever that might be somewhere on the internet? And I basically thought this was lost forever. And I just sort of put up that question as like just sort of we had this saying that we were sort of like PIOTS, like put it on the site. Like if you ever have anything you want to know, put up the question on the site.
You'll never know. You'll never know if you don't ask it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this kid named Sean somehow found some like old Usenet archive and found a copy of this game.
Wow.
And so he like retrieved it, and I actually like put it in my Dropbox now so I don't lose
That's
it.
amazing.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I did way more QBasic than pretty much anything else except for maybe play basketball when I was a teenager. Like that was all I wanted to do. And I had hundreds of games, but I don't have a single one. Like they're all gone because we didn't have the internet. I never put them on the internet. They were on like 3.5-inch floppies and on our 486, which my mom eventually got rid of. And they're just gone, which is kind of sad. But I did make my website out of QBasic. So QB64
your current website is
my current
still
website.
QBasic.
It's powered, and it's not just like a static site generator. It actually runs QBasic code when you hit jamin.dev. So that's kind of fun. It's QB64, so it's built on Mono and stuff like that, but it's the same stuff.
I did like a static. I didn't know the term at the time, but I did static site generation. The way that I learned to make websites was that the thing I really cared about in high school was cross country. We had a really good cross country team, and so I'm pretty sure I made the best high school cross country website in the country in 1997, 98, 99.
Yeah.
Like cross country scoring is kind of complicated. Like your first 5 finishers place people, and then your 6th and 7th displace people, and everyone after that gets pulled out of the run. So like there's a little bit of like not like a complicated algorithm, but like, it's annoying to do by hand type thing for scoring. And so I made like a little QBasic program that would like, you put in the order of everybody's finish, and then it like makes a nicely formatted, with tables, like all the different, results of scoring and slices it different ways and whatnot. And then I would put those up, and actually it started to get like a lot of traffic. But by a lot, I mean like, once a week someone would email me or something like that. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Just from like, because there just wasn't that much content out there. And so me putting up these race results and stuff was like, a lot of
it was a big,
people
at the time, I'm sure it was a big deal to be able to just like go to a webpage and see results instead of having to go find a piece of paper posted on a wall somewhere.
Yeah. And so
that'd be motivating too.
Yeah.
That'd be really
no, it really was.
Knowing people are looking at and using your thing. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. There's something about coding, I would make these QBasic games, and then I'd bring them on a 3.5-inch floppy over to my cousins, and we'd play them together. Like, because I'd have all on the same keyboard, everybody had 3 keys, turn left, turn right, and shoot, or something. And, and we would just play for hours. So there's something like really cool about that. Someone else actually enjoying what you make.
Yeah. Huge deal.
Yeah. So you eventually ended up at Harvard, right?
Yeah.
And from what I understand, it was about the same time as Mark Zuckerberg. You knew him there at Harvard?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I'm a couple of years older. I'm 3 years older. And I don't remember our exact ages, but I'm 3 years ahead in school. And the way we met is that I was on the Ultimate Frisbee team in college.
Okay.
And the summer before my senior year, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. for the summer. And I was playing in what they call like the pro league there. It's not really professional, but it was just like a moderately serious organized league in the summer. And there was a guy who was like assigned to my team, and his name was Mark Zuckerman. And he was a very good player. And he just came up to me and said like, "Hey, I heard you go to Harvard. I just graduated from UVA, but I got into Harvard Law School and I have 1 year of college eligibility left. So I was thinking I would try to play for the team, or can you connect me with the rest of the people on the team, blah, blah." So I, talked to the captains, and I said, "Hey, this guy's really good. We're going to, it's going to really help us this year to have Mark Zuckerman on our team." And so we had this fair at the beginning of the year where you just sort of, like if you ever seen the movie Pitch Perfect, where there's all these like a cappella groups singing and trying to get people to sign up and get their email address and stuff like that. Imagine that, but there's some dorks throwing frisbees around trying to get people to come to the Ultimate Frisbee team. So we had an email list of people signing up, and we after the sign up happens, we go look through it and we see Mark Zuckerman, and then a few rows down we see Mark Zuckerberg, and we were sort of like, "Oh, okay. Who's this bizarro fake Mark Zuckerman?"
I love it.
And then at the first we played some tournament in northern Massachusetts to sort of like a tryout tournament for people, and Mark Zuckerberg came to that. But it was actually like one of the windiest. It's probably like 40-mile-an-hour winds for whatever reason. And in the warm-ups, he was warming up with a guy on our team who I was friends with, and this frisbee kind of, if you ever thrown a frisbee in the beach in the wind, like, just these gusts of wind can sort of cause it to sort of modulate up or down like a foot or two in just a split second. And so this basically happened where a disc just kind of like dropped a whole foot at the last second and smacked Mark Zuckerberg right in the face, and his nose was bleeding everywhere. And he had to be like, one of my teammates had to like skip the tournament to drive Mark Zuckerberg to the emergency room to get treated for this. And so like for the next 2 years, Mark Zuckerberg was only sort of the punchline of this. "Oh, do you remember like fake bizarro Mark Zuckerman who, showed up at the tournament and got hit in the face and was never seen from again?" Yeah. But then the other thing I did was I was on the college newspaper. And so after I graduated, there just wasn't a lot on the internet, and I was working as a programmer. But, if you're a programmer, you can't, sometimes you're waiting for things to compile. Sometimes you're waiting for inspiration. Sometimes you're just being lazy and you just go look at other stuff on the internet.
Never.
And,
I don't know what you're talking about.
And so I would sometimes read the Crimson, like the Harvard College newspaper, just because I still knew a bunch of my little sister was still there. A bunch of my friends were still there. And I saw this article about the Facebook and that Mark Zuckerberg had launched this thing called the Facebook and that it had, immediately gotten very popular. And so I signed up for Facebook very, very early, even though I was already a graduate. I think I was the 1,160th person to sign up for Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah. And then eventually when Facebook sort of turned into a real company, like, a few months later, because it just really accelerated very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Some recruiter from there emailed me and sort of said, hey, like, founders of Facebook, I've heard of you and we'd like to have you, come work with us and build, this is becoming very popular. And I was just looking at the website and just thinking I could make this in a weekend. Like, I'm not going to go work for some guy who's 3 years younger than me. I have a real job at Amazon. So I just kind of ignored this email.
Oh.
But then they launched photo tagging. And I just remember thinking, like, wow, that's such a smart idea. Like, I wish I'd thought of that. And like, this is going to be because you could just tell, like, people, like, we were just talking about how your QBasic games, like, you made all these things, but like only a couple people, like your friends, got to see them, and then they just sort of disappear into this hard drive and die. But when you did photo tagging, it's like all these photos on your digital camera. It's like, oh, here's pictures of Jamin, here's pictures of Robin, here's pictures of Brent, and all of a sudden now you could tag them, and not only Brent could see them, but Brent's mom and his family, later on, once people more than college students were allowed on. But it was just so smart.
Yeah.
And I also just saw, like, a lot of people I knew using it all the time. But then, so finally, a couple of guys I'd known from school, I was at a birthday party somewhere in Seattle, and I ran into Dave Fetterman and Andrew Boz. Boz is actually like the CTO of Meta now. And they were sort of like, guess what, Charlie? We're quitting our jobs at Microsoft and we're going to move down to Palo Alto and work at Facebook. And I was sort of like, really? And then I
that website that Frisbee guy made?
Yeah.
Frisbee guy.
And I think I drunk emailed the recruiter. I replied to this like 4-month-old email from my BlackBerry at this birthday party. I was like, sure, I'll come talk to you guys. And then I sort of joined the parade.
That's the most like early 2000s sentence ever.
Oh, that is hilarious. Yeah, the BlackBerry.
The BlackBerry and the Facebook recruiter.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, Wikipedia says that you created a database of the Harvard student body. That project partially inspired Zuckerberg.
Yeah, I've heard this. I actually have never asked Mark Zuckerberg directly about this, but I have heard that I should ask him something. I don't know why I never did. But I got in trouble freshman year because I probably should have been studying, but I was just messing around with the like when you get to college. I mean, I don't know, things are probably really different these days, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, when you get to college, all of a sudden you go from having like a dial-up modem and incredibly slow internet to having incredibly fast internet. And also there's like a network where there's just like users and like all kinds. And I just thought this was very interesting. And so
and this was before they did any kind of security to lock down the network.
And so I like to credit myself with convincing them that they should add a few layers of rate limiting and security.
There you go.
doing some good.
Yeah, right.
But I basically
the original bug bounty.
Yeah, there was a program called like PH on the Unix system that would let you look up like sort of like the phone directory entry for any user. And so I just wrote a script that went through the entire list of all 30,000 users on the Unix system at the university and ran the phone book program on them, and then just put them all into like a database, but it was really just like a giant text file. And and then I wrote these little scripts that would say like, oh, like, what if I want to know who, Jamin's roommates are? Then figure that out. What if I want to know, I just got a call from 617-233, whatever, like reverse phone look up that, or who are all the people in Wigglesworth entry E? And you could do that. And I didn't realize there was anything wrong with this. So I just sort of
course not.
I made it my .plan file. Like I just put these instructions for like, hey, if you want to use any of these tools I made to look up this stuff, just run, these programs. And for a while, everything was fine. And like occasionally people would use it to like, do something like find out somebody's roommate or look up, or, if they missed a phone call.
Stalk an ex-girlfriend. It's fine.
If you were dating somebody, though, you already know what their phone number is and where they live and who their roommates are.
It's true.
So I didn't.
It's true.
Like that's the kind of thing I did that like made me think there wasn't really a problem here. But then we're actually right in the middle of final exams my freshman year. I got an email from the dean that was like, you need to come in.
Oh,
and I knew that was bad. And then basically they sort of said, that my mom had actually made me read the entire student handbook before I went to school. But like, it's so boring that I didn't remember like every paragraph of every, but apparently on page like 158 in the second paragraph, it just says, you will not compile information from student directories.
Oh, wow. Like that is specific policy.
Ironclad.
So like, this is probably not the first time someone tried to do this. Maybe the first time someone's done it that way. But
what happened is they did actually pass out a physical phone book at that time, and kids would sell them to telemarketers because college students, like maybe you want to sell mattresses or something, or like sometimes recruiters would want to reach all, like Harvard has some weird things about it. And so that was so this was actually not really like that, those kinds of things, I understand why you wouldn't be allowed to do them and why that was not okay. Sure. But this was, I think, mostly harmless. But I was very distracted freshman year. I probably did worse in my finals.
Well, I call you up during finals week. Like,
I was running around trying to avoid that. But in the end, they didn't kick me out of school or anything. They were just basically like, don't do that again. But I had to be pretty careful about not committing any other computer crimes for the rest of my undergrad. But so I think what happened is probably somebody had told that story, or probably an embellished version of it, to Mark Zuckerberg, and that somehow I think he may have seen a kindred spirit, and that was what made him want to reach out to me.
Start making that. Yeah, I mean, like you were going to create something of you were going to create, like, that's just who you are. And Zuckerberg's same way, where he was going to create something. He was just looking for an opportunity. It makes sense.
Side question. How does it feel to be a person that has a Wikipedia entry? And do you ever edit it yourself?
I think like one thing that's a little odd about it is like, you're not really allowed to edit your own, like the rules of Wikipedia that you can't just like edit your own thing and say like,
that's weird.
Yeah.
I am me. I know that
right?
this is going to happen. Or just like feels like it should be the case. And I really don't like the photo there. And a couple of times people who know how much I don't like the photo have tried to change it, but it always gets reverted back to this one horrible photo that makes me look very odd. I don't like it. And some of I think at this point, most of the like totally factually wrong things are gone, but like I do feel like it presents a very odd picture of me, but that's like not how I think of myself.
It's so weird that you have no control. You're like the mercy of the internet,
right?
Yeah,
and that's the thing
write this
for
thing
me.
About you.
Like so much of my life and my work and stuff right now is about like React Native and doing these other types of things that like it sort of is an interest. It's just but most of the content on the Wikipedia page is like a snapshot of like stuff from
20
stuff
years
that happened
ago.
in college or 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
And so that's, it feels like sort of I don't know, maybe one day I'll do some more stuff that will be noteworthy enough to make it into my article. It'll be relevant again.
Yeah. I was going to say, you did do some noteworthy things. Obviously you worked at Facebook and you, I don't know, how long were you at Facebook?
I worked there about 3.5 years. I worked on a whole bunch of different things. And probably the biggest thing though was, if you remember, there was a time when like games on Facebook briefly became like a huge thing.
Oh
like
my
Farmville was probably the biggest one, and Zynga Poker was very big and whatnot. So I worked on a lot of what we called like the platform team, where we built all the sort of APIs and other things that sort of let developers build onto Facebook and whatnot. So that was probably, and I worked on some other stuff too, like the first version of letting you upload the videos to Facebook and a bunch of other things. But that was the platform that basically just became a games platform was probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember those days for sure. Yeah, like you said, Farmville was gigantic.
That was
and
probably
there were
I
others.
think that was during my like Facebook heyday when I was in high school, and like
Yeah.
everyone was on Facebook. That's what.
Yeah.
And now,
Right.
and
It's
now
weird to think of a
nobody under
time
the
when-
age of like 30
Right.
is on Facebook.
Yeah. Facebook was cool.
Hey,
in
I
those
take
days.
exception to that.
It's hard to.
You're over the age of 30, yeah?
I know. You're just reminding me of how old I am. Yeah, I don't go on Facebook as much, but I've picked up a little bit because there's still a lot of real life that happens on Facebook, especially in groups. Like Facebook groups, particularly.
Groups
are
and
good
Marketplace
for
is the reason I
things.
haven't been able to
Right,
get rid
exactly.
of my Facebook account.
Yeah. So you eventually co-founded Quora, which is a question and answer site. Was that right after Facebook, or did you do anything in between?
I took a weekend off, I think, and but not much.
Makers are going to make, right?
I would recommend taking more than a weekend off, actually, if you're trying to
Yeah,
start a
right,
company,
right.
because there's just a lot to do, and then things like making sure your car is registered, and that like you have all your other things set up so you don't have to worry about them. It's a good idea. Should have done that.
How did you like come up with the idea for Quora and get connected in with that?
I had worked with the guy that I co-founded Quora with at Facebook. He was the CTO of Facebook for a while. He's sort of my boss for a big chunk of the time I worked there. And we had worked well together at Facebook on some stuff. But he had left at some point, and I think he was interested in starting a company. And there are a bunch of different ways that we would talk about that idea. One of them was kind of like, I think he had the original, this guy worked with Adam D'Angelo. It's been in the news a little bit lately. He had the idea sort of to do a knowledge site, but we talked about a bunch of different ideas and sort of had a bunch of different thoughts about why it made sense. And one of them was like, I had this idea that like, if you wanted to, like there's this idea that like doing some sort of consumer startup is you pick some wild, crazy idea and hope you get lucky that it like hits. And I think sometimes people do that. Like Snapchat strikes me as like the ultimate version of this, where it's like, what if you made a photo sharing app where the photos disappear? And
It so does. It's such a random idea. And you're like, how did this get to be?
but it turns out to be the best idea. But like,
I don't know. TikTok would like a word.
well, TikTok, they really worked on it for a very long time before it hit. So I really admire their persistence there.
Because they pivoted several times, right?
I don't think they even pivoted that much. I think they like the pivots are really small. I think they were always trying to do like video
They were just like
stuff.
honing the perfect vision of, and it worked.
They were just leaning more into lip syncing and music and realizing those words were working on the platform. And then eventually they got enough.
But Snapchat definitely felt like, hey, let's throw this random crazy idea together and put it out there and see what happens. And it
and so when we were discussing different ideas, I was sort of like, well, the one way to sort of give yourself a really good chance of having a successful thing is find something that is not very good, but very popular, and then make a good version of it. And so like, you could look at like Facebook as this, where like there was like MySpace and Friendster already existed, and there were people really liked them and were all over them. But those websites were pretty broken. Like they just didn't, like Friendster would often take 60 seconds to load its homepage, and MySpace was sort of charmingly broken in a bunch of ways, but really definitely like didn't really work that well.
Charmingly broken.
And so, but then when you sort of had Facebook come along and like not even, I mean, Facebook was janky in certain ways. Like certainly, you know, if you took the 2007 version of Facebook today, people would not be impressed and sort of say, oh, you know, I can't believe you didn't use this component that's easily available on NPM. And so the idea was like the main thing that was like a knowledge base at the time was Yahoo Answers. It was just basically like Wikipedia and Yahoo Answers, and Wikipedia didn't cover that much, like anything that like just, you know, wasn't in newspaper articles or magazine articles. It wasn't allowed on Wikipedia basically. And Yahoo Answers was almost like a joke. It was just sort of like, oh, people ask questions and then people give unserious answers and just sort of make fun of the people asking questions. But there was still actually some good information buried in there. And so like, I think they were getting like 25 million visitors a month or something like that. And so we thought, hey, if some people actually a good place for doing this, that could be really valuable and be really just great in a bunch of ways. So we just tried to do that. I think a really early thing that we learned was like, at first we just imagined people asking questions would want to know the answers to those questions. And then other people would like, for whatever reason, just like want to answer questions. And we could try to motivate them in different ways. But then what we kind of realized was that a lot of the stuff people were writing that were answers early on were actually somewhat interesting to read, no matter who you were. It's because we had a lot of like a lot of the early people that we got on it were like we both happen to know a lot of grad students at the time because we were just that age. And grad students, I think, are sort of often very sort of underutilized, where they are very smart, but they don't actually have that much that they have to do in grad school. And so they have a lot of like free, mental energy. I think this is less true than it used to be, but it was definitely true that there was a lot of free energy. And so we were able to get just sort of a core of people that were very smart, writing some interesting stuff. And I think one of the key insights that made it a better product that was we started realizing, if we focus on just like taking the best of this stuff and showing it to kind of lots of different people, then that'll be motivating to the people writing stuff and also just be fun reading experience. And that can kind of make this a more high quality, better system. I think for a while that was working really well. And then it shows up a lot in search results, but I think the level of quality isn't quite what it used to be, and it's not as exciting of a thing as it used to be. But which is sad for me to see. But I left over 10 years ago.
Yeah, I imagine so, because it was a big deal. I mean, I used Quora, quite a bit in its heyday.
Yeah,
and every app like that sort of has a life cycle to some degree, but.
And with ChatGPT taking over the world, you kind of wonder how AI is going to change the face of that sort of question and answer space.
That's for sure. I'm sure a lot of GPT is trained on Quora.
I think that is likely,
without a doubt.
I'm sure there's a lot of influence that it had there. So that's a legacy as well. Did you do anything between Quora and Expo? Was Expo like your next thing?
I took a lot of time off. I didn't do anything for almost 2 years. I wasn't really planning to leave, so I didn't have a plan lined up. And I just took a vacation and traveled a little bit, played a lot of flag football and daily fantasy football.
Yeah. Well, can I ask you, Charlie, you say you didn't plan to leave. Was it something where, I mean, I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but like, is that something where you just were kind of dissatisfied with the direction? Did other people want you to leave? Like what happened there? I
don't totally know what happened, but person I started the company with just fired me, basically. Forced me out.
No kidding.
So yeah,
wow.
It was pretty sudden, but I'm fine. It's fine. But
you ended up very much on your feet.
Yeah, it worked out, but.
That's a real hard thing to go through for a company that you've helped found. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was weird, but
the time off was probably a good reset.
Yeah, but also like a big reason I took a bunch of time off was that one of the last things I worked on when I was working at Quora was I basically started the teams to make like the iPhone app and then the Android app. Quora's not even like a property that like strictly like at that time obviously needed a mobile product. But I was just looking around and seeing like, hey, everybody's in these meetings. People are just constantly looking at their phones, looking at Twitter. They're just like, people are just using their phones more and more and more every day. This is becoming such a big deal. We need to recognize that this is how people are just shifting to using computers. And we wanted to get something out there quickly. And so I said, okay, designer, engineer, go make an iPhone app. But like to save time, we already have a good mobile website. Why don't you just wrap that mobile website in a native Scala, like basically doing the sort of version of like Ionic or Capacitor or something. But like, I think this is very early days. And so there weren't as mature libraries as there are now.
Yeah, it was more rolling around.
Yeah. And so it just was kind of crazy to me, but it took like 9 months to do that. I mean, the whole process of doing that and then submitting to the App Store and waiting weeks some of these things have gotten a bit better. Like you don't typically wait weeks for App Store review anymore.
It's down to like a few hours in a lot of cases.
In some cases, yeah. Sometimes it can be weeks.
Right. It depends on what your issues are and what's in your app.
And so I was just sort of like, wow, I can't believe it took 9 months. I mean, making the entire original site, the front end, the back end, designing what it was, and building a community took like 5 or 6 months to get into like an alpha. And the idea that like literally just sort of wrapping a mobile website in a tab bar would take longer than that just sort of seemed crazy. But then, launched, and then immediately was something like 10 or 11% of the traffic to the service.
Wow.
And people really liked it. And we even found that it's surprising how much people actually even wrote answers on, like we sort of, our theory was like, oh, probably people will look up stuff here and read stuff, but a lot of people won't write that much on there because typing on a phone is uncomfortable and stuff like that. But it turns out that like a lot of people have kind of the same way I was talking about graphing calculators earlier and why program, like even though it's a worse medium to program in many ways, the fact that you have it on the school bus or you have it in social studies class means that like
right, it's the convenience outweighs any of the inconvenience.
Yeah. And so a lot of people actually, they had free time on planes or on buses or whatever. And so that was when they would have time to, do some random thing, like write a good answer to a core question. And so we actually got a surprising amount of good content written there. And so we kind of pretty quickly wanted to do an Android version. And I thought, okay, well, we've already solved these problems of communicating between a native layer and JavaScript in the web view. We've already solved the design problems, mostly of, turning this mobile app turn the mobile website into a mobile app. This should just be a breeze and only be a couple of weeks. And then, of course, Android is fragmented and a mess.
Android is Android.
So 10 months later, we finally have an Android app in the App Store. And of course, like similar thing where it got good reviews and it immediately became a pretty big chunk of the traffic. And so after I left Quora, like everything that I could think of that I wanted to work on was like mobile, because it just sort of felt like we even had a joke at Quora. I mean, it's funny, sort of a joke, sort of a real observation that we would sometimes say, oh, we're making the last website, where like, and I, if you think about every sort of important internet thing since then, it's like Instagram, Snapchat, Uber, TikTok, Instacart, DoorDash, all those things you like mostly use as apps, and like they do have websites, but like the websites are basically afterthoughts.
Don't try to use TikTok on the web.
Yeah,
it's not. They basically just like use the app, please. They just like funnel you back into the app.
Yeah, and I mean, and mostly the mobile. I think mostly it's there because they need when you share videos to someone who doesn't have the app installed yet, they need something that can show you the video. And
yeah, exactly.
Like I said, I was just sort of interested in building mobile apps. But one thing that was just really different is like when you think about something like Facebook or Quora, it's sort of like say, oh, I could build that in a weekend or a week, or, and probably it would take a little bit longer. You're always optimistic as a programmer or whatever. But like if you had an idea somewhere in 2005 to 2015, you wanted to build a website for it, you could really just sit down and build it with yourself or maybe one other person and make something that worked pretty well. But then when you think about mobile, I mean, pre-React Native, pre-Flutter, your choices are basically to like use web technologies.
Like
PhoneGap, Cordova,
Good they exist, but also like I remember just talking to different startups and just observing myself that would be like, you would make something and people would just be like, this doesn't feel very good. I want to use a real app. And like startups I would talk to were using web technologies to deliver their app would basically say like we switched to using web technologies so we could move faster across both platforms, but then all of our engagement numbers dropped and, like our reviews are lower in the app stores and stuff like that. And so it's just like, that didn't feel satisfying as a route to go. Especially because most of the things that are exciting are, using things like multimedia, having really slick animation, those are the things I want to do. And so like I had lots of different ideas. And so like one of them that I sometimes talk about to illustrate this is I was taking time off, so I had a lot of free time. I was also like probably meeting people for like coffee or a beer, like a couple times a week, just to sort of, because when you're not working and stuff, people always want to catch up and see what you're going to work on, or like if you want to work on a project with them or just, whatever. And so I had this idea that like, hey, I'll make an app where it's sort of like Uber or Lyft, but I'm the only driver on it. And so if you need to go to the airport or the dentist or something, instead of emailing me and trying to schedule a coffee for next Thursday at 2 p.m. that we're both going to have to drive to and then spend 20 minutes looking for parking and somebody's going to be late, blah, blah. You just look on this app, and if I'm in the area and you have a, dentist appointment coming up, just push the button. If I'm free, I'll just, show up at your house. I'll pick you up, drive you to the dentist, and we'll catch up there. You'll save money. I'll feel useful. And this will be a great way for me to sort of fill my days. Obviously, this is a whimsical, silly idea that like probably isn't any kind of real business or whatever. But I was sort of thinking, if I could make this as a website, I would just do it. Like, it's worth like spending a weekend making that. Maybe it turns into something. Like we were just talking about Snapchat and how what a goofy, whimsical idea, but it turns out to be, a gigantic business and a gigantic product is sort of a super important part of youth culture. And so maybe this is, if you could actually build it and see, maybe this is the beginning of something. But when you think about building that as a mobile app, it's like, okay, I'm going to download, I'm going to get Xcode. I'm going to start writing Objective-C. I'm going to start making this first screen.
The friction to building a mobile app just like squashes all these like whimsical ideas in their tracks.
Yes.
Oh, so true.
And so I was just imagining like, okay, am I going to spend a year of my life making an iPhone only version of this stupid product? And then even if this is the beginning of something that like V2 or V3 turns this thing interesting, that's going to take another 8 months, 9 months of iteration. That's going to be also painful and kind of awful because, changing stuff.
And the math just doesn't math for this little whimsical idea.
And so at this time, I was sort of kicking around that there has to be a better way to build stuff like this. And I'd worked on, I mentioned how I'd worked on the developer platform at Facebook for the games, stuff like that. And a lot of the work I'd done at Quora in the early days was just making a lot of framework that ended up, it was pretty similar to React in a lot of ways, but it basically helped our designers basically build the whole site themselves really quickly and taking care of a lot of the front end infrastructure and stuff like that. So I built a lot of stuff for developers. And so I was just thinking there's got to be a way to help people make stuff much faster across both platforms using something like JavaScript or something that's that easy and fast to write in and sort of dynamic and doesn't take 7 minutes of recompilation every time you make a small change and, things like that.
Is that really how people lived? Oh.
Kind of. Like
fast refresh has spoiled me.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so nice. Yeah.
And so I was just talking to different people about this, and I ended up having lunch one day with James Ide, who's my co-founder at Expo. I was basically saying, like, here's what I'm thinking. Most people I talk to kind of don't get it with this idea. And then he just kind of, like always, he had very many sharp insights and thoughts. And at the end of our lunch, I just sort of said, hey, what do you think about quitting your job at Facebook and just working on this with me, even though I don't really know where it's going? And he said, let me think about that. So then, but he messaged me like 2 days later. I was just like, hey, let's do this. And so we just quit his job and we started just sitting in my apartment coding all day for a while until we put something together.
Beautiful early days of a startup.
Yeah. And this was pre-React Native, though.
Right. So
like, this was before you knew about React Native.
Wow.
Yeah, we also, neither one of us really, like I had managed the people making mobile apps at Quora, but I hadn't actually like done that myself. And so neither one of us, and James had worked on the web infrastructure team. So we both had to sort of learn how to build mobile apps to learn how to do it better.
It took some audacity.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously.
But we actually ended up building something. We basically ended up building our own version of React Native before React Native existed.
Oh, wow. So it was really a parallel, like, development. When did they kind of come together?
We had built our own thing, and it was sort of open source in the sense that if you like happen to know the URL of the repository on GitHub, it wasn't private, but also like we weren't talking about it. Like we didn't have any contributors. And so nobody really knew about it. And so we were basically about to like announce, like, I don't know how we were going to promote it, but like we were probably going to go to a conference or we were going to, post on Hacker News or something. Mm-hmm. And then React Native came out. And we just basically said, like, this thing just got like 70,000 stars on GitHub overnight and has the full marketing power of Facebook behind it. And it's basically the same thing with a few key differences. It's sort of the same thing that we're trying to do. Instead of fighting this, giant, like 8,000-pound gorilla.
Right. You don't want to fight Facebook.
Yeah. Why don't we just take this stuff and like build everything else we want to build around it? So we basically just became experts in React Native after that and dropped our own project.
Right. For a lot of people, I think it would have taken the wind out of their sails a little bit. Like, oh, Facebook's already done this. They have so much more firepower than we do. I guess we need we need a different idea. This one's not going to work. But you didn't look at it that way. You saw it as sort of a springboard to jump forward and build off of because you had more you wanted to build, not just, what React Native is.
I would even say I wouldn't think of it that way, where a lot of people say like good programmers are lazy and you don't really want to build anything. You don't have to. Mm-hmm. And so like, and in some ways it was kind of like, oh, we were going to have like our thing is only for iPhone because we have to start with something that's manageable. We were going to have to build Android at some point. That was going to be annoying. Okay, React Native, somebody's already working on the Android thing. we don't have to do that. But also, I would start from like, what are the problems out there? And like, does React Native solve all the problems for everybody? No, there's tons of problems that people have that like still need, people trying to make stuff have. And we also at the time were interested in solving the distribution problem to an extent. Like I think like a sort of background theme of this whole conversation has been about sort of the power of distribution, where like, I was sort of saying, when I was making these calculator games in middle school, it was so important that the link cable connected the different calculators to each other so you could make something or you were talking about how, it was so exciting when you would bring your floppy disk over of your QBasic game to your friend's house, and then all of a sudden
or your Tetris clone getting like lost on
Yeah.
And so one thing that was just felt really broken and still does in the mobile space is like when you build like a piece of awesome mobile software, it then becomes like, let me send this off to somebody at some mega corporation in Silicon Valley. You have this
thing that you have to like somehow get onto a million people's devices.
Get past the gatekeeper.
Right. In contrast, if you make a website today, maybe you're using like Netlify or Vercel for hosting or any modern thing, and then it's like within 45 seconds of creating your project, you can have a production URL that you can send to people, and as you're making changes, it's live updating. And so, for some things that, if you're working on a project for 6 months, you might say, what is, 36 hours of review time at the end matter, or whatever. But like, there's all kinds of things where, like, let's say you decided to set up a mini conference next week, then 36 hours does matter. And like the fact that you could get a website in production in 45 minutes instead of 36 hours might make all the difference in the world.
Well, we had, just to underscore that, we had a situation where we had, our app for Chain React and there was a problem with it and we needed to get it rolled out, and we were able to do over the air update to get it fixed just like that. We didn't have to go through, try to expedite, which is like 48 hours or something,
Instead, you expedited it.
Oh, no.
One of the cooler stories from Expo is like during COVID, there was an app that a health company in the UK made called Zoe. And they basically made a symptom tracker so that the health authorities could figure out where the pockets of COVID where like outbreaks were happening, so they could sort of direct more resources there, tell people to be more careful there. I don't know exactly what they did with the data, but I think it was, pre-vaccines and stuff like that. It was kind of one of the main tools people had to kind of manage the disease. But they had this idea and they wanted to get it, every day was sort of a big deal in that window of time. And so they found Expo, and they didn't have any like React Native experience at all, but they were sort of like, well, we don't have any native experience either. We need to be on both platforms, and a website's just not going to cut it because people will just like want an app. So they built a really basic app in like 24 hours or something, submitted to the app just enough to clear the bar of getting approved. Yeah. And then they kept working on it throughout this week and, used OTA updates to get, added a little bit more functionality to the app. And then and they were able to get a bunch of publicity around it and get the support of like the health authorities. And within a week, they had like 1 million daily actives on this app, mostly because they were able to build it really quickly and then use over-the-air updates and stuff like that. And so we were really, really proud to help with that.
That's incredible. That's more like the web. Yeah, like the web was, where you could just kind of build stuff and get it out there.
Right. And so a kind of a theme of a lot of the work we've done at Expo is basically take a lot of what's good about the web and bring it into the world of native and React Native and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean,
I know, well, Robin's project right now here at Infinite Red is fully Expo.
Yeah, fully Expo, all three platforms, custom dev client, config plugins, all EAS, the works. Cool.
We're not using Expo router, although we did try it a little bit.
Unfortunately, when we were setting up the project, Expo router was still in like alpha.
Yeah.
And wasn't quite ready.
It's come a long way.
If we were starting the project today, it would be Expo router.
Makes sense.
Yeah. From the outside, my kind of perception of Expo, early on, I was like, okay, first off, what is this? Because it's a little bit sometimes hard to tell people what Expo is. You're probably better at it by now, but I talk about it's a layer of, there's a CLI, there's a lot of really high quality open source libraries. There's this custom this dev client that you can use to kind of make sure that it just kind of like makes everything easier. And then of course all the services and the EAS side of things and over the air updates and push notifications and all those things. But when it first started, it was sort of like, okay, so this is kind of for demo apps, for toy apps, things like that.
For beginners,
that was kind of the conception of it. But I remember tweeting in, I think 2019 or somewhere around there, I was like, I think Expo is the future of React Native. Like it's not right now. It's not the present. Like if I start a new app, I'm not using Expo, but it's in the future. This is what I was saying in 2019. It's the future. And then last year, I think it might've been even before that. I was like, okay, it's ready. Like it's time to start using Expo, everybody. And one of the coolest things about it, in my opinion, was really meeting your team. People that I met from Expo, every single person that I interacted with was incredibly thoughtful, smart, productive. They were genuinely curious about what I thought about Expo, and like, I would give feedback, and you could just see it like actually have an impact on, your roadmap. So I didn't see like the end goal, like where you all are now, or maybe where you're headed at the time. But I was like, this team is amazing. It's fantastic. So, bet on that,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think
and I know you got to be incredibly proud of your team.
we've been really lucky to have a great group of people.
Yeah.
When in doubt, bet on the good team.
The people.
Yeah, the people.
Yeah. And you've hung on to them. Like people aren't rotating in and out of Expo's team all the time, which speaks to a good culture and whatnot. Actually, let me ask you about that, Charlie. Like how have you built that culture? Because, like prior to that, you had Quora. I don't know how much influence you had there on as a co-founder on the culture and whatnot, but like at Expo, it seems like it's a good culture. Like how have you built that?
Yeah, well, I think that like culture is really a team effort. I'm sure you see this at Infinite Red and stuff like that, where individual person matters, but like the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth person, they're going to really because it's really like it's made by the group. I think we had some great people join up with us pretty early on. Like, Brent was, I think, the very first person that we hired, and he's so important to the project. And,
he's fantastic. Yeah.
Jess, who is not as public facing, is super, important person in the culture of our team, and, really sets a lot of the internal values and the vibes of the team. And, obviously Evan has become probably the most prominent public facing person on the team, and is just sort of a huge part of not just building our stuff but building our culture. And then there's a lot of other key people. I feel like I could just go and I could list off every person on the team. And
yeah, right.
I don't know if we want to spend 30 minutes doing that.
Evan and Brent and a number of others on the show before, and so they're all just like, it's always a delight to talk to people.
Yeah, and I think it really like, and I don't write much code anymore and make that much more stuff directly, and James does a lot less of that too, because he's managing a lot of people and stuff like that. And so it really is important that we've been able to get together a group of people that care a lot about developers and making it possible for people to bring dreams to life and just taking care of developers. I do think that we have a really special group of people, and they're doing really caring, deliberate, good work, and we've done it over a long period of time, and I feel really lucky that we kept it all together. But I think when I say, how did this happen? I feel like, we tried to do that, but also I don't know how. Like, I feel like I don't have kids, but when I look at people who do have kids, a lot of times they're sort of like, people are like, how do you have such a wonderful family? And you're like,
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Fingers crossed that nothing horrible happens. And it's just sort of a miracle of things just happening. And, I do think it's very fragile, and that like at any moment, like we don't have a very big, our team is medium sized, but there are a lot of people on the team where if like one person left, it would really be a big blow. And I think that maybe one thing I try to remember every day is just like how important each person on the team is, and that like, even if I left or James left or any of the key people left, we would keep going. But like it still is, each person is really, really important. Yeah,
I think that's where it starts. You have to start with the individual. You have to care about the individual and learning what makes them tick. It seems like Evan's working on stuff that he really enjoys working on. So he's going to do his best work there. And he's only able to do that because you give him the freedom and the agency to do that. And I think, anybody, like that's how we approach it at Infinite Red as well, is I wanted agency. I wanted to be able to do those things when I worked at other places. and building a company where that was not only allowed but encouraged was a big part of like, you know, if I had found a place like that, I wouldn't have started my own.
Well, yeah, you and Todd always talk about how you started the company that you wanted to work at.
Yep, exactly.
And it's really human centric. It focuses on the people as people.
Well, Charlie, we have kept you very long on this one. This is one of our longest episodes that we've ever done, but yeah,
I think it'll be one of the best too.
I think it's one of the best. I just want to ask you, I guess, just sort of in closing, do you have anything, you know, planned for the future for Expo that you can share? Anything, you know, just in terms of the vision or where you're headed with it?
No, we don't have no plans.
No plans.
Just kidding. No, I think like
continue to work. Let Evan do his thing.
No, I think there are a couple. There's a bunch of things that we're really excited about, and like I was saying, it all starts with like, what are the problems that people have, and like how can we make stuff better for people that are trying to make stuff. And I think like two things that are really on my mind this year are like you were talking, Robin, about how you have this setup where you're using, you know, a bunch of EAS products and a bunch of libraries from Expo and stuff like that. And I could sort of tell in the way you're talking about that you did a bunch of steps to set all that up, and you probably feel that you're probably proud of this contraption you've made of all these things. And I really want to, I do think, and Jamin, you were sort of saying how Expo is a lot of things. It's hard to sort of summarize what that is in one sentence. And I think part of it is just that we've run around and tried to solve different problems for people trying to make apps for a while. And it isn't just it's just like solving problems for these people. But I think we're going to try to be more coherent in what we offer this year and pull all those things together into something where it's a lot simpler to use all the pieces and have them work together. And I'm excited for that. And
well, we're excited for pretty much anything you guys put out at this point. True. We're basically your number one fans over here.
It's true.
Yeah. And then we're also looking a lot at like what are people doing with Expo, and like how can we, you know, make that easier for them. And obviously like people are excited about all kinds of new things, like, you know, being on more surfaces, using new things like Rack server components, things like that. And so there's a lot of work to do just to keep up with the way the ecosystem's evolving. And some of that evolution is pretty exciting. And so I think we're just planning out stuff for the first couple months of the year. And I think I'm pretty excited about a couple of these things.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you for being a part of the React Native community and not letting React Native's release deter you. In fact, it actually accelerated you. I think that without Expo, a lot of the things that you've smoothed over with Expo would get pretty irritating. You know, they would get to the point where people would not want to deal with them. We've done React Native since React Native Android came out in 2015. So we've gone through all those bumps and bruises and stuff. And with Expo, it feels like, I know with Robin's project and other projects where we're using Expo, it feels like we're shipping features and we're not fighting the system, which felt like
that's great.
Yeah.
I mean, that was already it was already an upgrade above building it twice in Xcode and Android Studio and dealing with all of their idiosyncrasies. But it was not, you could tell it wasn't all the way there. It wasn't where we want it to be. But Expo feels like it's headed the right direction. And we continue, actually, we're working on an Expo section of our website. We're going to build out a whole Expo section just to kind of showcase, you know, the stuff that we've done and why we like Expo, why we, you know, recommend it, and sell those services more. I mean, I could see a future at some point where we really describe ourselves more as Expo consultants more than React Native consultants.
Awesome. It's been really fun actually getting to know your team better, and also, you know, a lot of other people in the React and React Native community, because it really is a group effort. I mean, like, there's so many libraries that people make that make stuff possible with Expo and React Native that like level up what you can do if you use Expo. And so we're
everybody
want to support everybody in this group.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, guys.
As always, thanks to our production team with editor Todd Worth, our assistant editor and episode release coordinator, yours truly, Jed Bartosky, our director of marketing, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Our producer and host is Jamin Holmgren, and executive producers and hosts are Robin Hines and Mazen Chame. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio wherever you get your podcasts.